This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. What does it mean when a government tries to stop journalists from doing journalism? This is my interview with Kit Klarenberg. I am joined from Belgrade, Serbia by Kit Klarenberg, who is a journalist, who is an enemy of the UK government.
Decency.
Decency, yes. And probably an enemy of the United States government as well. But we know for sure the UK, United Kingdom government considers you to be, I think, an enemy of the state, essentially. I don't know what they said to you, but I want to talk about it. So there's so much to say to you. I want to say a few things before we get going here, but the sort of big headline is that in May you were detained by UK. What do you know what agency it was? I never heard that from you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, theoretically, it was Britain's border force, but I mean, there was quite clearly something a bit deeper and darker. Given that I wasn't allowed to know the names of my interrogators, they referred to each other via code name, and at one point, rather farcically, one of them forgot the other's code. And it's like, sorry, are you A1 or B7? I can't remember. And then, yes, and there was, I mean, quite clearly, the kind of questions that they were asking and the kind of level of knowledge they had about me was indicative of the fact that they were being directed in this by Britain's security and intelligence services.
Yeah, we're going to tell that whole story in a minute, but I just want to lay out to the audience who a lot of my audience knows exactly who you are and are huge fans of yours, by the way, but some people won't know. So you worked.
How dare they?
I know, right? Well, that's all going to change, man. So you've been writing for the Grayzone for a couple of years now, a few years.
Yeah. Like I mean, initially on and off from 2020 onwards, but I mean, in the past kind of 18 months or so, like with increasing intensity and frequency.
Yeah. And everyone should immediately go to the Grayzone site, and you can just, I mean, everyone should look at the entire site, but just click on Kit's name there and see what he's written. It's stupendous, man. Seriously, for the last year and a half, the journalism that you have produced, which by the way is largely investigative, like real investigative journalism of governments and their activities vis-a-vis foreign nations and their own citizens. I mean, it's second to none, honestly. I think that what the Grayzone is doing generally is simply the best journalism out there. But what you're doing is yet another notch above that. I think it's just so good. And the evidence for that, of course, is that the government is coming after you. And this is not the only time the government has come after you or the Grayzone, and we're going to talk about that as well. You're clearly over the target. I mean, they spent 8 hours with you, interrogating you and basically warning you to change careers. So you're doing something well. And I want to talk to you about, and of course, for those who don't know, I mean, the politics of this are what's essential. And how would you describe your politics?
Well, I mean, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool tanky, very pro-Mao and all that. That's not true. No, I mean,
You're more of a Pol Pot guy?
Yeah. I mean, Mao didn't go far enough, but no, I mean, in all seriousness, no. I mean, I would say that, like, I mean, historically, I have been on the left. I was a big supporter of Corbyn and his very, very boring, not particularly subversive social democratic program. When he was leader in the UK, I voted for him. I campaigned for him. So yeah, I mean, I find myself being, pushed, ever leftwards. I mean, at least through my research, my journalism, it's just abundantly clear that so many state structures, quote unquote democratic structures, legal and regulatory, they are all, I mean, they are at best mythic fictions, or at worst just like totally fraudulent. And you are consistently, every minute of every day, we are fundamentally misled about the nature of the countries we live in the Western world, and the nature of the world that we live in more widely. And yeah, when you break through those different layers of propaganda matrix, then what you're really left with, that's an ongoing investigation of mine, I suppose, if I had to tie it all together. But yeah, I mean, I've historically been on the left. Some people place me in that kind of tanky category. I mean, I reject that because I thought the invasion of Prague was a bad thing. But I mean, that's okay. by the by. And I don't think labels are particularly helpful at this point, because I mean, we're seeing how, I mean, in the US and increasingly in the UK as well, you have two political parties which are effectively indistinguishable on every conceivable issue of any substance whatsoever. And indeed, this has kind of been historically the case as well, actually. And yeah, never have the supporters of either party, if you can even call them that, have been so bitterly divided. Like, I mean, it's quite remarkable how the Republicans and the Democrats say, or Labour and the Conservatives say exactly the same things. The opposition Labour Party in the UK is literally running on a platform of, we're not the government. We are completely indistinguishable from the government, but we're not the government. That's the really crucial thing. We're not offering you anything. Some spokesperson recently said that we're not going to make any promises because we don't want to break any promises. Which is quite an amazing electioneering principle. But yeah, those labels have always served as a tool of dividing people who, one way or another, usually have more in common than not. I mean, of course, that's in bad ways, in terms of mainstream politics. But yeah.
So you write about, and Grayzone writes about, not welfare state issues, not domestic policies. You guys are, and this is totally fine, you're interested primarily, almost exclusively, in what would be called sort of national security state politics, foreign policy, and then sort of attempts to control the population, the internal population, right? Through surveillance, various means of control, which, in the UK, you're finding out are quite extensive and more creative than we have here in the United States, because the United States, fortunately, our government is constrained by law, at least to some extent, in ways that yours is not. But I'm thinking about how you are identifying here, sounds like, as a social democrat, or something like that, or a democratic socialist, something like the good old-fashioned left labor type person.
Yes.
And it seems to me that what you got is a welfare state. It might not be the perfect welfare state to you, but it is still a basically functioning welfare state. You can walk into a doctor's office and get treated for free anytime you want. But what you also got with your welfare state, with what the Labour Party brought to the UK, is more imperialism. After the British Empire was supposed to go away in the 1950s and 60s, it's my goodness, they're talking like Queen Victoria is still around and they're ruling the world. Hail Britannia. I mean, it's that kind of attitude, at least in terms of Russia and Ukraine, the way that British politicians and the British mainstream media has been talking about this war and about Russia and about NATO, makes the Pentagon and the New York Times look like milquetoast, look like they're skeptical about American imperialism. These people in Britain, I mean, Boris Johnson personally quashed the peace deal, right, a month or so after the war started. And then I think British intelligence has been far more involved in Ukraine. I think even more than the CIA possibly, but clearly just heavy. So, so you were born in this country. You left a few years ago, and I'm wondering what it was like. Have you been back since you left? By the way, have you visited?
Well, I mean, obviously, in May when I got stopped.
Of course, yeah,
Directorate. But yeah, I mean, I've I probably can count on, I think on one hand, the amount of times that I've been back since then.
Okay.
And each time I go back, as nice as it is to see my friends and relatives, I'm reminded of why I left, actually. And it's interesting. Like, I think that I remember when I started going away from the UK, like, regularly, just on holiday, exploring kind of different parts of the world, particularly Central and Eastern Europe, returning to the UK felt like going back to the last days of the Soviet Union. Like, it really kind of just, everything's grey, everything's broken, nothing worked, and people were just very, very, very depressed. And this has gotten worse over time. And as I mentioned, we are now heading towards maybe the government falling and being replaced by someone saying, we are offering you no hope and nothing. At a time when there is huge domestic political support for measures like nationalization of key industries like water. I see that in the US there's the push to privatize water supply, which is just completely crazy and pointless. And despite the fact there is 80% support for that kind of measure in the UK, it is just not on the agenda. I think that we're back now with the benefit of social media to really drive home this kind of hyper-normalized situation where politics, it doesn't even pretend to represent people's viewpoints and perspectives. It's effectively some childish fantasy football game between the red team and the blue team.
Yeah. And
you are choosing which set of management consultants is going to oversee an unchanging product for the next 5 years.
Yes.
As it gets steadily worse. And I mean, this actually ties in with just something that I've touched upon in my writing, which is that the UK, going back many, many years now, has published frequently, not that they get any media coverage whatsoever, the Ministry of Defence publishes these regular projections, these forecasts of what they think the world will look like. In about 2010, there was one paper they published which said, well, the fact is that Britain is going to be drastically declining in terms of its power and its wealth and its influence, and like living standards are going to fall as countries like China rise. And the one way that we can kind of counteract this is via mass manipulation, not just in Britain, but like overseas. They talk about something called the triumph of narrative. So that which in the mind, according to the British Military Intelligence Brain Trust, they literally state, well, even if we lose a battle, we can still win the war in people's minds. So, I mean, and this has, I think, very obvious relevance to what's going on in Ukraine now, where there have been numerous. I think the Daily Telegraph the other week published this embarrassing video that was talking about how, well, even though Ukraine is militarily at this huge disadvantage to Russia, they can still win by Zelensky taking selfies of himself in a petrol station with Ukrainian citizens, and indeed infantile social media memes. And it's meanwhile, there's about 70,000 Ukrainians have died in the past 3 months, maybe even more.
Yeah.
Horrific. But yes, there is this pervasive sense that by fooling people abroad about the nature of the kind of country that Britain is, and fooling the British themselves about the state of play in their nation, that Britain can maintain its prosperity and its power, even though that is rapidly declining. It's a very weird, deeply deluded mindset, but they're wedded to that. But as I say, you have the benefit of alternative media and indeed social media for people to voice dissenting opinions and alternative viewpoints, or indeed to state what the actual facts and reality are, which is why Britain is heavily invested in trying to crack down as much as possible and on alternative media sites, and indeed just police social media in direct and indirect ways.
Right. So let's talk about what happened to you. So May 17th, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So actually, can you talk about what you were doing in the 2 weeks prior to that might have, I mean, I know you have theories about why they did this, but what were you up to at that moment?
Well, I mean, I think that there have been, I've been being looked at for quite a while, I think,
okay.
by British intelligence,
right.
because there's an individual called Rob Green, whose aunt Hilda Murrell was an anti-nuclear campaigner. She was killed most likely by MI5 in the 1980s for publishing sensitive information they didn't want in the public domain, and he, for having carried out an independent ongoing investigation into her death, has been subject to harassment by security services all over the world. And I think that I had a conversation many years ago where he said, well, the second that you started writing about the security and intelligence service, which was probably about 2017, and I was also doing this while working for, amongst other places, Sputnik. So that was obviously an even bigger crosshair drawn on my back as a result. He said, well, they've probably been inside your flat. They probably go through all of your posts. They probably read all your emails because they're trying to work out what you know and how you know it and what you're going to publish next. So I think leaving the UK, which was unrelated to my journalism, I just had enough of the place. Many years ago now. I think at that point there was probably a sense of frustration and a level of protection afforded to me, which, particularly in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and my work investigating how Britain has secretly been provoking and this and supporting, if not outright encouraging, Ukraine to conduct escalatory acts and to keep the Americans firmly wedged in this unwinnable quagmire. Right. That was probably game over in terms of me ever being at liberty if I ever return to the UK ever again, at least in terms of being grilled as to who I'm really working for, and indeed where I'm getting my information. Now, so in the reason I went back to the UK was, I have no desire to otherwise, was there was a very close relative of mine who's extremely ill, and I probably would never see them. I'm never going to see them again now. But so I flew back rather begrudgingly, and I had a sense that maybe that I would be subject to harassment coming through customs. I had no idea it would be to this extent. And yes, when the plane landed at Luton, which is one of the world's worst airports, the pilot said over the tannoy, everyone have your passports ready because border control is around the corner. Now, it had been several years since I'd been back to Luton, thank God. So I thought that maybe the airport had been re-landscaped and all refurbished to make it less of a nightmare to get around. And I thought, oh, right, maybe they've moved the passport desk. But no, the second I got down on the gravel, there was a team of plainclothes officers, some of whom looked extremely stern indeed, checking everyone's ID very thoroughly, and they read mine, and then immediately was told in a very firm but somewhat polite way, oh, please come with me, sir, this way. And there was another team of officers waiting for them inside the terminal. I was, yes, taken to a back room. All of my property was taken from me. I was told that I had the option of answering all of their questions or being arrested. And answering all their questions included giving them the passcodes and diagrams that I used to access my electronic devices.
What?
Yeah, and this is what's quite remarkable as well, is one of the things I found quite interesting was there was a huge amount of pushback, both from organizations and just individuals in the UK, including people with whom I would not consider typically allies of mine, over what happened to me. And I'm eternally grateful to these people and these organizations for raising a stink about this. But I think in the US, it was really the backlash, the outrage and shock from the fact that I was compelled to answer questions under coercion, under threat of arrest, was really shocking. Incredible. Because this is I might add that in the UK. The UK prides itself on being, the birthplace of modern democracy and justice, and giving birth to legal principles which are now used all over the world. The right to silence was a uniquely British creation, and was indeed one that was intended to prevent, yes, the use of threat or force or coercion to make people talk, but it also was at one point so protected as a concept that it was illegal for suspects in criminal trials to testify in their defense, because it was considered highly improper that something that they might say could be used against them or twisted or taken out of context. Sure. So yes, which is quite remarkable. But then here we are in 2023, or is it 1984, with me being told that, yes, the wording was remarkable. It stated that, well, as you are not under arrest, you don't have a right to silence. I mean, and there must have taken. It's like it must have taken.
Wow.
They must have employed a bunch of lawyers round the clock to come up with some way of spinning that. And I think that also, and Branko Marcetic, who is a contributor to Jacobin, and I think the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, he's very good, and he wrote an article very kindly. I was hugely grateful about what happened to me, and he made a point which quite a lot of people missed, which is the legislation that I was stopped under. It was introduced specifically to deal with alleged quote-unquote state threats, so people who were acting on behalf of hostile states against UK interests. In 2019, the United Nations said that it was terrifying and dangerous and draconian, but they've used it on several people since, myself among them. And Branko pointed out something which is really remarkable, which is the wording of that legislation states, you can be a state threat without knowing you are, without intending to be, or without the hostile state upon whose interest you are acting knowing or wanting you to.
Oh my.
So, I mean, it's quite some conspiracy, isn't it, when both conspirators don't know they're conspiring. I mean, we are getting, and even more shockingly, recently the UK passed something called the National Security Act, which, I mean, it actually, the grounds under which I was stopped kind of pale into significance almost, but versus what's been passed now, where that principle that you can be a state threat is now enshrined in national legislation affecting all British citizens. And indeed, but the same principle applies, that you might not know that you are acting on behalf of a hostile foreign state. Now, I don't think it is a slippery slope argument that I'm making here, but I can easily foresee UK authorities going after people who post the wrong things on social media on this basis or express the wrong opinion. Oh, you're in favor of a ceasefire in Ukraine? Well, that's Russian disinformation. And while you may not know that you are working in the Kremlin's interest, you are, and under the terms of this new law, that means you can go to jail for a very long time, because any criminal act which has a hostile state sponsorship or element to it is now punished far more severely. This applies to protests, all sorts of political activism, and yes, like basic speech. You heard it here first. So, I mean, as I said, that this to go back to what happened in May. I was sat in this windowless, airless room in the bowels of Luton Airport with these two officers who, as I mentioned at the start of this interview, I didn't know their names. They indicated that they knew quite a bit about me, but there were some questions where they were quite clearly trying to unearth as much intel on me as possible. I mean, there was, excuse me, at one point I was asked, are your energy bills included with your rent? And if so, how much is your rent? There were lots of invasive questions like that. But then when they really drilled into stuff related to the Grayzone, like does the Grayzone have a relationship with the FSB and an agreement to publish hacked documents? I mean, I almost burst out laughing because it's a completely ludicrous proposition. But it's not funny at all.
Wait, why is that a ludicrous proposition? Why couldn't you guys be working with the FSB?
Well, I mean, but just in general, it just seemed to portray a terrifying ignorance of how journalism worked. So this question was, I assume, predicated on the fact that the Grayzone in the past 18 months has published some stories which critics claim, and emphasis on claim, were sourced from FSB or GRU hacking operations. If that's the case, we've not seen any evidence to suggest that's true, and none has been presented by anyone making this specific claim. But more importantly as well, that in the context of the way that journalism should work, and it never does now, is that if you are speaking to a human source, i.e. a person as your source of information, then it would matter hugely if it was a Russian spy telling you something. Right? If you are working off primary source documents, then that the document is the source. It doesn't really matter where it came from unless falsification can be proven. But I mean, I must say that we receive an enormous amount of material at the Grayzone. You know, we report on a vanishingly thin percentage of it because we are very rigorous in terms of being able to authenticate what we've received. We want to make sure there is a public interest defense for reporting it. Yeah, we apply basic journalism standards, which quite clearly do not apply when the CIA conducts hack and leak operations, and then the New York Times and the Intercept report on it, and they win awards. You know, like to give you an example, that we know that the Trump administration, I think it was in late 2019, authorized mass cyber warfare against Iran. And you know, around this time, the New York Times and the Intercept, as I mentioned, they started reporting on these Iranian government documents that had been miraculously given to them, which seems kind of rather implausible cover story. And much of this reporting focused on General Soleimani, the Iranian, the IRGC commander, and how evil he was. And then fast forward to the start of the next year, and he gets killed. And it was specific, like, so quite clearly this was an information operation that was laying the foundations of manufacturing consent for the cold-blooded murder of someone most Iranians regard as a hero. You know, I mean, it couldn't have been more naked than that. And so, yeah, I mean, it was deeply disturbing. It was very clear that they were looking into every aspect of my private life. Something they kept on probing was, you know, how did you end up in this line of work? I mean, bearing in mind that I made clear that I'd studied foreign policy at university, and it was something that I was, you know, interested in. I followed current affairs, etc. And I'm fairly sure that what they were trying to drive at, trying to tease out of me, was, was I a sleeper agent before I suddenly started reporting on the security intelligence services, or was I at some point recruited? Yeah. You know, there was a lot of paranoid suggestions and you know, all sorts of questioning about my political views and you know why I believed certain things. And you know, you mentioned my report on the on 9/11. They were very interested in that, and which I thought, and you know, what do you think happened? Ooh, like, you know, what's your take on? I mean, just as a kind of brief explainer, that 9/11 article was based on a then recently released court filing by an investigator for the Guantanamo. I think it's the Office of Military Commissions. It's the court that's trying 9/11 suspects and Guantanamo inmates. And the filing itself was based on interviews with former CIA and FBI, you know, veterans, senior officials within those organizations, which stated, who all stated that the CIA had via a liaison agreement with the Saudi intelligence services, a relationship with at least 2 of the 9/11 hijackers. Right. This is absolutely bombshell stuff. Amazing stuff. I mean, as someone who has followed, you know, I'm old enough to remember it happening. I was actually bunking off school that day, as I so often did, so I actually got to see it all unfold on TV, you know, pretty much in real time back in the UK. It was an absolutely fascinating document and deeply newsworthy. It got zero traction at all. And then I came across the filing. I discussed, you know, Max and I discussed it, as we often discuss stories, and he was like, well, obviously just do it. And like, that was one of our most read stories ever. And you know, I had to turn down multiple podcast requests because it was just, I was so busy talking about it with different sources. But yeah, so they specifically asked me about that, and I don't know what they were, what the overall objective was, what they were trying to get me to say or thought that I would say. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff as well about they were rather surprised that I only had my British passport with me. They were like, how many passports do you have, and all this other stuff. Like, I mean, perhaps there was this sense that they were expecting some kind of, some kind of Sergei Skripal type assassin to arrive, and actually it was just mild-mannered, thoroughly English me. But yeah, that was it. the initial impact of it was I was just kind of I was numbed and stunned by it, and I've got to, I must say that, like, to all of my my friends and colleagues at the Grayzone, their support meant everything, and Max and Aaron were incredible, as was my dear friend Alex Rubenstein. But not only that, like, in those situations you learn who your friends are, and it turns out I have several thousand that I didn't even know about.
Yes,
in many cases.
Yeah.
And as I say, I had people who I wouldn't necessarily mark out as allies, including people I had extremely cross words with, who said, irrespective of what you think of the Grayzone or Kit Klarenberg as a journalist or person, this is wrong. And a large number of people wrote to their MPs about this. There were several websites covered it in full, interviewed me. The National Union of Journalists initially put out a statement saying that they were mortified about what happened, and that was withdrawn. There was a huge pushback from the primarily people that I've annoyed over the years, which is, join the queue. It's ever expanding, and I mean, it's some of it was really nasty, but I mean that the overwhelming outpouring of support for me was really something, and it's not something I'll ever forget, really. But equally, though, the more that I kind of played it through in my mind, the more that I, delved, kind of thought in detail. I mean, probably I am blessed and cursed with an extremely good memory, and so I was able to replay what happened over and over again in detail, and all sorts of things they asked me, and kind of avenues they clearly wanted to go down. And I kept on asking myself, why would they ask you this? And there was no good answers, like, at all. And I think that particularly when you bear in mind that that I was digitally strip searched. They went through all of my electronic devices and several memory cards I had in my possession, and they still hold a memory card of mine, which is very old, and I primarily thought it was sort of full of music, but perhaps they found something on it that they considered interesting and sensitive. I mean, quite what it would be, I do not know. And I'm told that this is now being held indefinitely while I'm because it's potentially relevant to a criminal investigation, whatever that means. I mean, what isn't potentially relevant to a criminal investigation, if the terms are suitably broad. So yeah, I mean, that's ongoing. It's not something I think about anymore. While the NUJ may have pulled their statement of solidarity with me, the union, the Serbian Journalist Union, which is actually a powerful union, which goes above and beyond to protect reporters who, in some cases, when they report on corrupt dealings in this country, can genuinely find their lives at direct risk. I mean, they've got my back 100%. So I'm grateful to them too.
They seized your devices and went through them without arresting you. That's
indeed, yes. And they also, I mean, I think I'm obviously, this is not something that keeps me awake at night anymore, but they took my bank cards out of the room, and they asked me lots of details about my finances. I mean, quite what they did with those cards, I don't know. They took several SIM cards from me, at least one of which I didn't think was working anymore. Quite what they did with them, I'm not sure. Presumably it could be cloned. Presumably they took all of my name and contact information, whatever texts I might have had on them, from them. I mean, again, there is that, as deeply unpleasant and invasive as it was, there is that sense of, well, I don't actually have anything to hide, so I've got nothing to worry about. But then that's one side of it. But then on the other, the more paranoid part of your mind thinks, well, they could, if they really wanted to go after me, they could probably find something.
Oh, goodness.
I mean, I mean, there is a trend towards this, like like lawfare, basically, like just bog people down in endless mind-numbing, spirit-crushing legal processes, or bureaucratic and administrative processes, and just kill off their enthusiasm and their hope in the process. I mean, I don't particularly have any sympathy for these people, particularly not politically. But if you look at what's happening to a lot of the January 6th protesters, some of whom are still in pre-trial detention, and then their cases keep getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and you've got to think why.
Yep.
Like, you know, maybe they might say something on the stand that they're not meant to, or indeed they prosecutors having hyped up January 6th as, you know, the second coming of 9/11, if not somehow worse, might actually they might their belief that they can actually get convictions in some of these cases are waning. So yes, I mean, anyone affected by that, I do feel sympathy for them from the lawfare perspective, if nothing else.
Yeah. So do you think that the people who detained you and interrogated you genuinely believe that you are a Russian asset?
It's difficult to tell. I mean, I did get the sense from one of them who said, they said, I really don't want to detain you longer than possible. Whether they were trying to engender sympathy from me, or like some kind of a level of affection and rapport with which they could exploit an interview, I'm not sure. But I think that I did get the sense that they knew that I absolutely wasn't a dedicated FSB operative. I think perhaps there was that sense that they thought that maybe I could have some way or another come into contact with FSB hacked material as by totally working for the Grayzone. I mean, yes, they took a very keen interest in my relationship with Max and how how and where material is received, and indeed whether anyone but Max has access to the Grayzone email address and or the Grayzone servers. I mean, we are run on a shoestring. This is like a generic Gmail account that people send stuff to a lot. Like this is effectively a WordPress website in many ways. Yeah. But like we're absolutely not a intercept style operation with a vast office and a massive legal team.
Yeah, so this leads us to another very important topic, which is that my major criticism of Putin these days is that he doesn't pay you guys enough.
Indeed,
you've had to do a fundraiser. Max launched. So I'll tell the story if you can correct me if I'm wrong about it.
Sure.
About 2 weeks ago, something like that, Max launched a fundraiser for Grayzone, but specifically to help pay Kit and 2 other Grayzone writers and editors, basically to become full-time so that they can do more of this journalism, which I think would be one of the best things that could happen to the entire world, by the way. If you just do more work, would be just a wonderful thing. But anyway, so he launched this on the Grayzone. I mean, it's on GoFundMe. And then $90,000 came in pretty quickly. And then GoFundMe sent Max a message saying that they have to hold this money, can't give it to the Grayzone because of, quote, external concerns. And they didn't explain this. They didn't say who they were. And then Max just waited and waited, I think, for a week or two. And then he finally decided to do found a better platform to do this from, which is called, what is it? Spot Fund. Is that right?
Yeah, Spot Fund, yeah.
So everyone should immediately go donate to the Grayzone and go to Spot Fund. So he launches this new thing. And now you guys have made, what is it, 150,000 on it so far?
No, we're closing in on 150,000.
Yeah,
but I mean, yeah, it's currently at about 130,000 when the original. I mean, okay, so the obvious.
Oh, wait, hold on a second. Sorry. So hold on a second. So Putin can spend seemingly endless money on artillery pieces, and mortar shells, but he can't, like, you guys are, even if this is successful, like 150 grand split 3 ways for professional journalists is not just saying, he could do better, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, the ruble is in the toilet at the moment, which is the key reason that we're launching this.
It's the sanctions. That's his excuse.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's indeed, times are tight in Lubyanka Square. But no, in all seriousness, this is actually, you touched on something really interesting, which is that like there are several websites which our dear friend Paul Mason, we'll get into him later. The Paul Mason and his British intelligence handler are secretly run by the Russians, including Consortium News and Mint Press. Now, Consortium had their PayPal shut down, and when that was shut down, they only had 10 grand in it. And it's just like, well, I mean, huge outlay for the Kremlin there. You might think that you might think they'd be more lavishly financed, but yeah. So in effect, We heard about problems at GoFundMe. I mean, I must say just from the off that we were quite taken aback by the response to this. And our original target was only 100,000. Roger Waters initially gave us 30,000, which was absolutely astonishing. He's a childhood hero of mine.
Wow.
And what was quite interesting was when people caught wind of this, we know for a fact that Rolling Stone was planning a hit piece on Roger Waters and us, but then they did, and neither they nor our critics kind of factored in that actually this makes us look really cool.
Yeah,
and it gives us this kind of deep hearing credibility that one of the world's most consequential musicians, who's been on the right side of history on every conceivable social issue, thinks that we are worth funding. And it's that we had several people who were initially trying to frame it as a huge dunk that we'd been funded this way, and then actually realized that actually we better stop making noise about it because it's really good publicity for these people that we hate. But so we heard about the problems with GoFundMe. And we know for a fact, because they were very open about it, there are a large number of people with Ukrainian flags in their names, and often with Shiba Inu profile photos. This is NATO, this kind of online Strath battalion of trolls who just try and harass people and are constantly posting vile memes, and did things like mocked the death of a Russian tourist in Egypt who was eaten by a shark. I thought it was really funny because all Russians deserve to die, according to them. And so we know that they were filing complaints and that sort of thing. And then when we GoFundMe gave us a series of kind of fob off email where they said, well, yes, due to some concerns not stated, we're going to have to put a pause on you being able to access the funds. And I mean, to be fair and totally fair to them, they may have been inundated with hundreds, if not thousands, of bogus complaints and stuff, but that's still no excuse for withholding our funds. And then when it was clear, after several emails asking for clarity, it became clear that they were just going to ignore us. Max decided to move us to Spot Fund. Now, it was within 2 or 3 days, I think, that we had more donations than with GoFundMe. We were a few dozen grand off our 120 grand target when we moved GoFundMe. It's now at 130,000 and climbing all the time. I mean, again, we are so humbled by this and quite amazed, and it means it will never be forgotten. It really won't. And I just think that the reality is that independent media it's run on a shoestring. It is usually operation. These places often don't have offices. They might, I would say that from Mint Press News, where I contribute regularly, it was quite shocking actually. When I told the interviewing officers where I wrote for, and I mentioned it was just quite a few places, and one of them said in response, "Oh, I've never heard of Mint Press Zone." Because quite clearly their entire focus was the Grayzone. They hadn't done any research into my other writing, which is as good, by the way, and as valuable. But anyway, the point is that it is, and I understand that times are tight for a lot of people. I get that they're tight for some of our contributors too. The independent media is run on a shoestring, and not only that, it is subject to relentless attacks, as not only my experience with the terror cops, but people getting cut off from PayPal, this kind of financial warfare that's going on. I mean, PayPal recently adopted a policy stating that we reserve the right to close your account and keep all your money if you spread misinformation. I mean, whatever that means, and it's just that you got to think that if it was truly the case that websites like the Grayzone or say Mint Press, or the Cradle, which is another great website that I write for, if it was, which has had issues with PayPal, has been subject to DDoS attacks and attempted hacking operations and stuff. If it was truly the case that we were just publishing false information, and that we were this kind of ragtag bunch of conspiracy theorists. Like, why would there be such an effort to shut us down? Really, I mean, Alex Jones, again, someone I don't have any sympathy for. Yes, he's been very effectively shut down. But then his, ever since his banning from Twitter, etc., has just been allowed to continue his crusade against the truth apace. But I mean, why is there so much concerted, not only state level, but kind of civil society level, attacks on us? And I think we see this with Nina Jankovic, who is the now former DHS disinformation czar, who's now doing much the same role on behalf of a British intelligence cutout in the UK. She's had to register as a foreign agent as a result. That she's relentlessly propounding this rubbish about how we're funded by Russia, or we at the very least further Russian informational narratives by questioning fundamental tenets of the official narrative of the Ukrainian war, or indeed investigating potential alternative explanations for certain events. It's quite remarkable. And you've got to ask yourself, I think that the real reason that there is so much there is this kind of ongoing blitzkrieg against us is that actually they are worried about people being exposed to inconvenient truths and alternative viewpoints. There is a British intelligence project called Open Information Partnership, very Orwellian, and it's effectively, this is a British psychological warfare and censorship operation that operates across Europe. But and Nina Jankovic used to be part of this, as did the founder of the Centre for Information Resilience. And in its internal files, which I've reported on, and I will never get tired of repeating this, there is a passage which explicitly states one of the key problems of countering Russian disinformation is that it's often factually true. And responding to inconvenient truths is naturally problematic. And it's like, well, yes, how are you going to do that? Well, the only question is, the only answer is via straight up censorship. And it's like, we see this in Paul Mason's emails as well, where he talks about he is worried about the emergence of a anti-imperialist political identity because he says, quote unquote, liberalism will have no response to it. And it's like, well, so what? So the response is ruin people's careers, deplatform them. I mean, really,
that's huge. So I want to talk about this now. I want to talk about the European left, which, as far as I can tell from here, it has completely thrown in their lot with what we might call the empire, or NATO, or the EU project. Paul Mason, we've mentioned a couple times, but let's talk about him, because this is a big thing. This isn't he one of the main reasons you got busted at the airport? I mean, I think he had to have something to do with that. But who's Paul Mason? Why is he important? And what did you do to him?
Right, so Paul Mason, what did I do to him? I caught him in the headlights of my justice, but in reality, so what Paul Mason is he may well not be known in the US, but he is a British journalist who was regarded as a bit of a maverick, like a bit of a dissident voice, for a long time on the left. He was very anti-austerity, and he was initially very pro-Corbyn. He's someone who I think seems over time to have lost his marbles a bit, but quite. I don't say that for comic effect. It does seem to have lost his grip on reality a bit. But also, I do think there are questions about the extent to which he was truly ever did have those dissident credentials, because. I mean, before we received from anonymous sources a tranche of his emails, which we then reported on and got in lots of trouble for, as we'll get into. He was very publicly making a stand, effectively stating that anyone who opposed arming Ukraine and anyone who supported a ceasefire was working for the Russians, basically. And anyone possessed of anti-NATO viewpoints, or who was questioning the origins of this conflict, which are complex, and don't purely boil down to Putin being this evil, murderous tyrant who just enjoyed invading countries for no reason. It might be one of the reasons, but it's not the only one. But in effect, like he was calling for them to be censored and deplatformed, and calling for concerted government and civil society action on disinformation. He was going after, in articles and on social media, a number of people that I consider dear friends, and in some cases, collaborators like Max and Aaron, like really going after them. So when we received some emails indicating that he was hatching plans with an individual who, well, yes, one of the many people I've pissed off over the years, called Amal Khan, who is a very influential counter-disinformation researcher who has used to work for the British government and was involved in psychological warfare operations in Syria on behalf of the Western-backed opposition there. Wow. That like they were coming up with really quite bizarre proposals to try and take us down, or at the very least get Russian state affiliated media affixed to our Twitter profiles, because at that time that kind of killed people's killed people's coverage. And but then it went further than that. They wanted to cripple us financially or legally. Like they were quite clearly, they wanted just an end to us. And not only that, but a wide variety of left actors. Now, we reported on this, and his initial response was to say, I'm not going to comment on this at all. And I won't be, and I'm just going to move on with my life. And then just the stories are just like kept coming, and more people who were named by him. He wrote this bizarre kind of enemies. Excuse me, I've got to stop smoking. He produced this bizarre kind of enemies map of how these different actors within the informational ecosystem reach different audiences. And it was just like, arrows pointing. Novara Media, which is this kind of upstart left-wing or centre-left outlet in the UK, how they recycle Russian disinformation and it reaches the black community, and how this could be, how we can neutralize these transfers of disinformation. And also, I mean, it was insane. And it's really, I think it's just very interesting that there was a recurring theme, which is that he and his collaborators were effectively saying, no, we shouldn't engage in rebuttals. Like we shouldn't try and engage with these people. We should just censor them. Or we should try and catch them out in John Oliver style pranks, Daily Show style sting operations. And it was just like it was just incredible that, like, I mean, yes, this is 3 people who write on a blog. At that time, Alex was a intermittent contributor. Wyatt Reed hadn't joined yet. We were a small shoestring operation in every sense of the word. Yep. It was, and you just think that, yes, the enormous amount of effort that goes into that, and yes, as his disinformation mind map indicates, the real fear was alternative viewpoints and inconvenient facts getting to the public, right. And they really don't like that. Right. They really, I mean, in Britain as well, I think that Britain since the very start of this has been very, very key, both in terms of keeping it going, of trying to push Ukraine to go forward, to keep the US involved, directly and indirectly. They want this ongoing because they have the British have this obsession with destroying and breaking up Russia. This goes back centuries. Yeah. I think they're particularly angry that it was previously, governed by a member of the British royal family. That's right. I mean, if you look at pictures of Tsar Nicholas II and King George, it looks like someone standing in front of a mirror. It's frightening how it's frightening how identical they are. Right. And I think that the brutal overthrow of the White Russians by the Reds in 1917 is not something Britain will ever forgive, because it showed that people power, the peasants could revolt successfully. It was in The Crown. Did you watch The Crown? They had a whole long scene of the Romanovs getting assassinated. It was very clear that the British establishment wants to remind us of the horrors of Russia, the horrors of Russia. Yeah. Oh yeah, indeed. I mean, and it's an age-old story. I mean, you've got to bear in mind that after when there was after World War I, there was this mass Allied invasion. It was almost every Western country under the sun invaded Russia, and then Britain and France, they developed detailed plans for how it was all going to be carved up. Like it was like the cake of Cuba in Godfather 2. It's like, right, so you're going to get the mining here and you'll get the oil here. Like they really, and that ethos endures to this day. That delusion. Anyway, the point is that not only that, but we know now, and it's actually been accepted even by the mainstream media, that Ukraine in April 2022, they signed a peace deal, which I mean, its terms, the terms of surrender are never in this war are never ever going to be as generous ever again, really, save for the nuclear annihilation of Russia, I think. So this called for Russian withdrawal, like from all of Ukraine, and it called for the recognition of Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk, the Donbass region, as Russian territory, and it would also enshrine neutrality for Kiev, which would be enforced by Russia and the US. Now, and Turkey, I think, as well, because that's where it's signed. Anyway, but the point is that we know that this is around like late March, early April that this deal is signed. Now, under the term, as Russia believed this agreement had been implemented or was going ahead, Russian forces withdrew from a large amount of territory, particularly in the kind of the north and the northeast of the country, including Bucha, which is a city / town near Kiev. Now, one of a dual a dual propaganda blitz immediately began, whereby Boris Johnson, to save his highly unpopular ass, as the Americans would say, he had a habit of, whenever he was in trouble at home, like flying out to Kiev to meet with Zelensky, he flew out at this time to meet with Zelensky, and we know now, and it's been confirmed, that the British said, we're not ready for you to give up yet, and we're willing to give you the financial and military backing to keep us going. Not only that, but it's also he visited, along with Zelensky, a large number of areas that have been quote unquote liberated, i.e. abandoned by Russian forces, and Bucha was one of them. Now, in Bucha, I think it was about 48 hours after the Russians left, claims of a mass slaughter of unarmed civilians started to emerge started to emerge, and Boris Johnson was very quick at pushing. This is proof of a genocide in Bucha. This is proof that Russia is waging a genocidal war in Ukraine. This is not just a military intervention, not like like that we do. It is concerned with destroying the entire civilian population, which is, I mean, a horrific proposition, of course. Now, at this time, a nameless US Defense Intelligence Agency official told Newsweek that while, yes, Russia was ultimately responsible for whatever happened in Bucha by token of having invaded the country, it could well be the case that these people were killed during the battle to take the town. There is no evidence to suggest that they were deliberately kind of targeted in this mass killing scenario, like, a la like Srebrenica or these other alleged genocides that have occurred since World War II. And so they also expressed, this official expressed concern that by pushing this genocide narrative, it means that constructive talks can't happen. Because you can't negotiate with the genocidarian, can you? Like, and so they were very worried about this, and this is what's come to pass: is that now Ukraine's position is we have these maximalist aims of retrieving all territory lost to Russia since 2014. Which, I mean, I think a large number of people in Crimea wouldn't want this, which led to the Ukrainian government to publish detailed plans of how they would ethnically alter like the peninsula, which is absolutely not genocidal cleansing at all. And but the point is that yes, those are aims which even the US officials have said are extremely unlikely to be achieved or even result in Russian nuclear strikes on Ukraine, if they even try. So yeah, it's created a very, very bad dynamic but it has powered that notion of genocide has been leapt upon by Ukrainian officials in seeking, more support and funding. It has, and it has also, interestingly, the British, through something known as the Counter Disinformation Unit, again, not Orwellian at all, which is this very secretive body, British government body. No one actually knows who works there or like what it fully does, but it has been admitted that they were policing narratives about the war in Ukraine online and having content removed or censored or suppressed that suggested that Bucha was anything other than a Russian massacre.
Right.
And it's like, well, I mean, why? But like, I mean, why are they doing that? I mean, at the very least, it's to ensure that a particular narrative remains ascendant. And it's, I mean, it is worth noting that I think it was Lukashenko said in the wake of Bucha that he had evidence that British commandos were involved in this. I mean, no evidence has ever emerged. It does seem rather farcical on its face, but Britain did shut down a Russian attempt to hold a special UN investigation on what happened in Bucha, which is, again, I mean, why? But I mean, it's all very odd. So I mean, I think at the very least, we have seen since the start of this how events can be spun in service of a particular narrative, and then the Grayzone is your friendly neighborhood guide to how that is happening and why. And I think that even this is we're in a situation now where frequently Ukraine will claim that buildings that its own air defenses have struck in attempting to take down Russian missiles were struck by Russia, or indeed it is claimed that there was that incident in Poland where there was a Ukrainian missile, and then Zelensky said, "We know for a fact it was the Russians, and we have intelligence to that effect." They tried this again in Romania not long ago. I think it was only it might have been last week that the Ukrainian officials claimed that a Russian missile that struck Romania was deliberate, and the Romanian government came forward very quickly to say no, it wasn't. And then nameless US officials have said that they are very angry that Zelensky is doing this, which says something. So
back to Bucha before we move on from that, because that is arguably like the most important propaganda point, I would say, for the West has been the alleged massacre in Bucha. I did not know until you just said this about the timing of it. I didn't realize it was immediately after the peace deal, which was signed in Istanbul, by the way. And I did not know that it was right after Russian troops had withdrawn as a part of that peace deal. But my gosh, the timing of it is everything, because that was then immediately used as you said, the reason why we cannot negotiate with these killers. And so and then the war was on forever at that point, right? Yes. So almost in a sense, it doesn't even matter too much who did the massacre. It's the way that it was used to advance the war and to make sure that hundreds of thousands more people get killed. But the bodies were found in the middle of the street, and I could see certainly possible that someone might have just dragged bodies into the street to make it look like a planned massacre, which I still think has happened. But anyway, that is remarkable. The cynicism of this is breathtaking. The sort of endless desire to sacrifice others in a proxy war with our enemy is really something to behold. And again, American people, British people don't know almost any of this stuff because people like you are getting censored. Now, I want to talk about, we talked about the left and liberals in Europe, and this favorite outfit of yours, of mine, of everyone is Bellingcat. And you've certainly written about them and you know all about them. Talk about Bellingcat, because they are used, I mean, sort of in the States, they're used like in pop culture, even, and sort of mainstream media always references them as the source, and also as the heroic investigative journalists who are taking down Russia, basically, and all the other bad guys in the world. But if you notice on their website, I had a hard time finding any investigative pieces about Western governments, about NATO governments. I didn't find any investigations really revealing anything about the misdeeds of the United States or the UK or NATO. It's quite remarkable how selective they are. But why don't you talk about Bellingcat?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this is they are very, very, very interesting. We're kind of, I mean, this is a huge rabbit hole that you've opened up with that.
Yeah, man.
But I think, in effect, that they are ostensibly an open source investigations website, which was their origins are quite murky, but there was this individual called Elliot Higgins who was a unemployed stay-at-home dad who can't even remember in interviews what he didn't study at university because he dropped out before he even started. And so he allegedly around the time of the destruction of Libya by NATO, he started conducting open source investigations at home, like using different tools such as Google Satellite or Google Earth to work out where things had to geolocate things. And it does seem that he, well, at least in theory, acquired some impressive skills on that front, and was noticed because he was posting in forums and on a blog called Brown Moses. He was posting a lot of material which caught the eye of people within the national security structure, and he was groomed and led along, and miraculously started Bellingcat as a website. I think it was a week before MH17, the downing of that Malaysian passenger airliner over the disputed Donbass in 2014, and then they started conducting investigations into that, but also they launched a crowdfunder and got an enormous amount of money, and they have operated ever since. It's been as you say, a go-to source for validating things in the media. I mean, I think that the utility of Bellingcat from the perspective of security and intelligence services is very obvious. So, I mean, they themselves have been highly discredited since the Iraq War. In terms of their projections, in terms of claims they have made, they are only just now kind of recovering their credibility, but that's only thanks to, I mean, at least in the US terms, most of the major media outlets like CNN employing an enormous amount of former intelligence analysts who come on and host shows and stuff. I saw that CNN ran a press release from the CIA the other day stating that intelligence, quote unquote, indicates that Russia is secretly using influencers to publish disinformation. We're not going to say what disinformation they're publishing or who these influencers are, but just know that that they are doing this. You can trust us. But anyway, the point is that so you have in the wake of Iraq, you have the massively discredited CIA and MI6, who previously used to be able to selectively leak intelligence. You also have the rise of WikiLeaks. Which is a hugely popular, and I might add that the term that Elliot Higgins uses to describe Bellingcat, which he used for his book, an intelligence agency for the people, or a detective agency for the people. That was just stolen straight out from WikiLeaks, and rather curiously, Higgins himself has has mocked rather mercilessly Julian Assange, which is just, it's just a horrific thing to do. But I think the point is that they are quite clearly, one way or another, an information clearinghouse for Western governments and Western intelligence services. I think the CIA is even
they take funding, don't they, from the National Endowment for Democracy, I believe, right?
They take direct,
which is funded by the Congress. So and is a front for the CIA, but I mean they take funding. We know this from our government, and indirectly, but it's absolutely the case. Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how the media is complicit in the lie that they are independent. I think that the Times of London published an article a couple of years ago stating that Bellingcat wisely refused money from Western governments. Other sources will say, oh well, they take some funding from National Endowment for Democracy, but which in turn takes some funding from the State Department. No, this is a lie. It's a US government agency, which its own founders stated operates to conduct publicly what the CIA used to do covertly. If you look at now they publish regular annual reports. NED is by far and away their biggest funder. The terms of that grant are not clear. They receive hundreds of thousands of dollars from them every single year to do But I think that the key thing here as well. I mean, they've also taken money from the Foreign Office and various Foreign Office cutouts as well. And I think that the key thing though is that that they very occasionally publish information which is, or investigations which might be somehow critical of Western governments, this never ever gets any traction whatsoever. Like on the very rare occasions they do this, like once every few months, it never gets any pickup in like the New York Times or the Guardian. But then when it comes to events like, for instance, the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia, which is this GRU defector in Salisbury in March 2018, they miraculously managed to find out who did it, and then the second that they went public with it, then other British authorities started running with the narrative that what they were saying was correct. And it's like, well, I mean, of course they knew and were just waiting, for Bellingcat to go public. And this has happened again. And now I might add that when they busted in late 2020, they supposedly found out the FSB operatives who allegedly poisoned Navalny, the Russian opposition activist, with Novichok. Because of course they would use this poison that they're uniquely associated with, which doesn't actually work. It's absolutely what you would do. I think that there was when they went public with that, a CIA official said, well, this completely confirms what we already knew. And it was just like, interesting. Or indeed, I think that there was the other agency officials have said that, oh, we love Bellingcat because we can just forward journalists onto them. Or like we can, or, they reach our own findings. And it's like, well, it would be difficult. It's not difficult to see how this would work. You would place a trail of breadcrumbs for people to follow. They have in many key investigations, they according to their own records, miraculously happened upon something, or they from some anonymous source gave the open source investigation collective that has all of this evidence that you can't see and you can't know where they got it from. And it seems very opportune. There have been numerous cases as well of Bellingcat making some really embarrassing blunders. Like my friend and colleague Aaron Mate, he caught them out in an absolutely staggering blunder where they published this completely fake, Bellingcat published this fake letter which they claimed resolved the OPCW scandal, where leaked documents indicate that the OPCW investigators in Douma in Syria concluded in April 2018 concluded that it was a false flag, not a government chemical weapons strike. Bellingcat published a fake letter which allegedly resolved the scandal, and they fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And Aaron showed that the letter had never been sent and was a fraud. Wow! And they had to very embarrassingly make a retraction and delete all these tweets where they were high-fiving each other and how stupid Aaron was. And it's like, I recommend reading the entire investigation. It's on the Grayzone website. It's absolutely fascinating. But you've got to think that there are so many instances where they've been caught out or made these rather embarrassing blunders, but then they're meant to be these investigative geniuses. Right. I might add as well that there's an individual called Garrick Alder who's he's quite an obscure kind of a parapolitical researcher. He's currently suing them in a Netherlands court for defamation because Timmy Allen, the pseudonymous Bellingcat operative who used to work for the Stasi, which was East Germany's feared spying and harassment agency, now works for Bellingcat and greatly enjoys doxing people and publishing their home addresses and engaging in all sorts of other cheery behavior. But that was related to Bellingcat falling for another hoax related to the Ukrainian war. I think that I wrote about this for the Grayzone earlier this year. I believe it was in April, but it was really quite remarkable. It very much appears that Bellingcat were directly involved in a Ukrainian intelligence operation that was intended to lure Russian pilots to defect to Ukraine, and they went along with it, and they seem to have aided and abetted it directly, and then it turned out it was an FSB setup all along, and the result was that Russia got a bunch of information which it used to strike, in a very brutal, fatal way, Ukrainian air bases, resulting in deaths and indeed several ministers losing their jobs. We've just had another purge as this interview goes to virtual press. We just had another purge of officials, allegedly due to corruption. I mean, whether it's just getting rid of people who know too much by this point, I mean, we're not sure. But yes, Bellingcat has claimed, or at least some of its representatives have claimed that, oh well, this was just a bunch of freelancers that did this this alleged defection operation, which just doesn't sound very plausible. If you're trying to get pilots to fly their planes into Ukrainian airspace, then you would need the Ukrainian government to know so they wouldn't get shot down. And it's like, and indeed, if you're giving them financial inducements, which they did receive. So yeah, it's all very murky. I mean, they seem to be so heavily protected in the media that no amount of gaffery or no amount of just imbecility can damage their credibility. But I just more generally think the war in Ukraine, there have been so many bad takes on it by so many people since this started, and we see this with all sorts of events like the death. This is before he died. Like the Prigozhin's alleged march on Moscow, where like all of these people were saying like, oh, this is going to be it. They're going to like defeat the Russian army. There's going to be another battle of Moscow. Like a guy with like 2 tanks, like really, like I mean, it was just and then that was immediately forgotten about, and then suddenly he died, and now that's been rather swept under the rug and moved on from. All of these people who were claiming that the Ukrainian counteroffensive was going to be like, not like something the world had never seen before. This huge tsunami that was going to send the Russians scurrying, and like, months later they've gotten past like the first set of mines, and so many, the mainstream media is openly reporting on the ever burgeoning cemeteries in Ukraine, and all these poor mothers and fathers having to like bury their children. Some of whom were like dragged out of school classrooms and university classrooms. And probably my favorite, or well, least favorite bad take on the war so far, Nicholas Kristov writing in the New York Times about how Ukraine was winning because of how many amputees it had. And how there were, the fact that people who've missing arms and legs are going back to the front line is a sign of, indefatigable Ukrainian grit, rather than like just an utterly hopeless situation. And I think that, yes, that there was no accountability for people kind of post-Iraq war. But I think that when all of the journalists who peddled, direct government lies or spying agency lies about weapons of mass destruction or nature of the war on terror, no one lost their jobs. But I think the sheer amount of, there is a huge amount of people in Britain and America who are like very, very, very doggedly pro-Ukraine. And I mean, I can understand. We understand why, for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's not great to be on the receiving end of invasion by any country. But like, it's also because the media has like relentlessly told them for 18 months that this is a total catastrophic failure for Russia. Ukraine's going to march on Moscow and demand peace terms. And it's this stunning kind of almost like Hollywood style success. And it's like, the reality is that it has been a bad situation from day one, which has just gotten worse. Mm-hmm. And like, no amount of, I mean, the other day, a British military official wrote in the Financial Times that, well, if every Western country gets their industrial capacity back up and running and starts making lots of weapons, by 2025, the Ukrainians might have won. And it's just like, when does it end? Yeah. When does it end? How many people are going to die? How many people have to bury their children?
They've told you when it's going to end. They've told you when it's going to end. It's when they regime change Putin. That's it. They're not going to stop. They're not going to stop until he's gone and replaced by someone who's friendly to them, not by Medvedev or somebody else like Putin.
Oh yeah, but
until he's replaced by a puppet, a U.S. puppet. That's it.
But this is another thing as well. Just like the delusion is that, like, I mean, Putin by liberal standards is like a dowdy liberal. Like, whoever replaces him is going to be so much worse. Like in every conceivable regard, like the Russian Communist Party, which is the biggest opposition party in Russia, they were pushing for what's happening now on a much grander scale 10 years ago.
Yep.
Like they have since 1991 warned that Russia must take hostile actions against NATO if it tries to expand to Ukraine. Like a widespread call in the Russian media, after February 24th last year, was what took you so long.
Oh yeah.
So like the idea that the fall of the House of Putin is suddenly going to make Russia a peaceful liberal. I mean, Navalny supported the annexation of Crimea.
Did he?
And he's like the West chosen guy.
I didn't know that.
Like, you know,
wow.
Yeah, it's just remarkable. Like,
wow.
you're not going to get some Yeltsin style drunken puppets. Like, you know, it's never going to happen again. It's never going to happen again. Right. And I think that we are heading rapidly towards, you know, a Cold War style situation where the Western world is you know, in not only in informational terms, but probably in most others, you know, economic, technological, is cut off from the other side of the world as well. I mean, we're already getting there with, I mean, you know, like Serbia is under enormous pressure at the moment because they have like Huawei stores where you can buy like really good phones. And like, you know, neither the Serb population nor the Serbian government has been moved by suggestions that, like, oh, well, this is the Chinese Communist Party running it, because I mean, the NSA has and CIA have backdoors in all US tech, in particular Apple products, whether you like it or not.
Yep.
Like, so I mean, they're not really fussed about like which hostile foreign spying agency is reading their messages. Yeah. They know it's going to be one of them.
Totally.
So like, but it is never ending. I think that, yes, that we particularly if, I mean, you see we saw recently with the various coups in West Africa and the prospect of some form of intervention there, whether direct French or through one of France's puppets on the ground. Like, we at the Grayzone, Alex Rubinstein and I, we wrote about how the leader of Nigeria, who was pushing for intervention in Niger, was used to be a bagman for a Chicago heroin mafia.
Yeah, I saw that. Was amazing work.
And we also, you know, delved into thank you very much. But we delved into ECOWAS, which is this French post-colonial, like neo-imperial structure, which basically impoverishes and miserates West Africa to this day. And you know, that remains one of the most read things that we've ever published. Like, you know, I've gained about 1,000 followers from Nigeria. Welcome, guys. God bless you all. Like, awesome. And we had people reach out to us saying, like, we have never seen the English language media ever report this ever. Never. Like, or ever explain what any of this stuff is to an English-speaking audience. But that's the thing, is that, you know, I wouldn't say, I mean, well, we are, yes, of course, you know, comprised of Anglo-Saxons for the most part. Like, we are looking to an international like audience increase, and our traffic over the past, say, like 18 months has, you know, in many ways never been higher. Good. Because people understand that they are being lied to by the usual source of information, and we remain one of the few, as long as, you know, I don't die in a tragic accident where I shoot myself 10 times in the head. You know, we remain the premier source of investigative journalism in the English language anywhere.
Yes, I think that's correct. And I think, I mean, pretty much everything you write, I mean, I think it's true for all of you guys, but certainly for you, I think everything you write would be considered a scoop. I mean, it's no one else is reporting on this stuff. No one else is even amplifying it. As you're saying, the mainstream media generally just ignores everything you say. But it's just one hit after another of things that no one else is reporting on. No one else is curious about. No one else is interested in. You guys, and you in particular, go straight into the places that I want to know about, asking the questions that I want asked, but no one else in journalism cares. It's stunning to me, but thank God for you, and thank God for the Grayzone.
Thank you very much.
What are you going to do now? What's on the docket now for you guys, or for you particularly?
Well, I mean, we've got a lot to come. I mean, I am having actually worked relatively flat out for most of summer. I am now, you know, on somewhat a break, but we have more projects to come. We are, once this crowdfunder is over, and, you know, hopefully, yes, that we're not going to get go fund me again. I mean, we have the spot fund CEOs, you know, sworn word that we'll be able to access the funds. We want to push in all sorts of directions. We want to do more video investigations. Alex and I, like, we may well start, you know, streaming ourselves, having a weekly, perhaps investigative podcast. Like, we really do want to push things forward. And I think what's quite interesting is, when, I mean, in the past year, we've had a bunch of major media organizations basically go down like Vice, which, you know, I'm old enough to remember not long ago when it was hailed as the future of media. And they were like all of these glowing editorials in all of the legacy media about how they were, you know, they were the future, and then now they're being sold for not very much money to George Soros, amongst other people. But then you also have like BuzzFeed News, which that was launched with much fanfare. I've even documented this. They seem to have been assisted in getting some early scoops by the intelligence services to really like plant their name on the map. And like, yeah, they're just collapsing now. They don't exist. And like, we've also seen other publications it openly announced they're going to start using ChatGPT and AI to write articles and like laying people off as a result. And it's just like, I think that like you know, there are journalists who find that development frightening, but I think that if you are genuinely doing really valuable, original, investigative work, like actually like this stuff is not going to affect you, you know, it's quite remarkable like what we've managed to achieve in terms of backing, you know, at a time when it is difficult for people. Like we are facing you know, I speak to friends of mine in the UK all the time who can't make ends meet, are considering leaving, have left. The same with the US. You know, it's getting really tough, and it's also, I mean, it is the analogy I would use. I mean, I mentioned earlier that, you know, we have the benefit of social media to understand how hyper-normalized stuff is, but it's like the same kind of alleged dissident voices within the mainstream ecosystem who are ranting about like how, you know, the American oligarchy say. So for, I mean, I'm talking about like specifically like Robert Reich, who he is on social media will bang the drum for, you know, we need a major overhaul of like America's economic system, and then but then when it actually comes down to it, writes op-eds for the Guardian on how Bidenomics is working. like you know, it's just like you know, we've also seen this with, I mean, on a political level, the Squad. You know, in the US, I mean, the UK had its own version of this in Keir Starmer, who said that he would uphold all of Corbyn's policies, but would run the party more efficiently and more professionally, and then, you know, immediately embarked on a purge, removing any and all traces of Corbynism from the party, has openly broken or every single one of his promises, has admitted that they never were going to adhere to them. They just made them to get elected. You know, all of these pledges and principles that he apparently held dear are now just jettisoned. I mean, in the US, where I have a great many friends who dared to believe in 2020 that they might be able to elect a FDR-style president by getting Biden in, and then the Squad will just relentlessly make his life hell and push him to the left on everything, and they just haven't done anything.
Yeah.
And like, and Biden is actually, you know, to his not even credit, but certainly significant, he openly told major donors that nothing will fundamentally change, and he's kept his word on that. He has kept his word, and I think that yes, that, you know, as the people, you know, can see for themselves that these systems are collapsing, that, you know, like the economy is actually like in the toilet, that like, you know, something really needs to change here. In that context, when you have all of these legacy traditional media sources all telling you everything is fine, well, you understand that it's not. Like, you know, but not only that, you understand that they can't be trusted, on which they can't. It's really quite remarkable, like the extent to which, you know, the media is still just lying about, you know, like so much, like all the time. But yeah, there are more people are becoming aware of it, or at least, if not more aware of it, then they actually have somewhere to go, rather than switch a channel from CNN to Fox. They can now, you know, access alternative voices such as ours. Again, long may it continue. Although yes, ever since May, you do have that, and you know, this has been, you know, an intermittent. It used to be a constant, but now it's only an intermittent worry of mine, which is is this going to be the last article I write before, you know, extradition proceedings commence? You know, quite possibly. Again, you know, I do have a large number of people with my back here, including some excellent lawyers, and yes, the Serbian Journalist Union, which is a lot more powerful and influential than one might think, based on its name. But yeah, I mean, it remains a concern.
Does the UK have an extradition treaty with Serbia? I was hoping that because of Serbia's politics that they wouldn't have a good relationship with Serbia, and therefore you'd be safer there. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of yeah. I mean, in theory, they do have some form of relationship, which means that if I was, but that at least theoretically applies to if it's a crime in Serbia, which I think the kind of distinctly British national security legislation doesn't really apply. But yes, I mean, as I've written about, Britain is pursuing a covert kind of Trojan horse strategy in the Western Balkans. They have openly talked about how they are setting up networks of civil society actors to hold local governance actors to account if they don't act as required. If they don't follow policies set out for them by the British, which I'm yes, ongoing battle to expose, not only in this country but throughout the region. But also as well, I mean, there is all sorts of. There have been some rather encouraging developments actually in that recently a German court. Now, Britain is still part of the European arrest warrant, which is a potentially horrifying structure, which effectively means that if you committed a crime, and say if you got caught smoking pot in Spain like 10 years ago, if you cross it through a border and in Croatia, and you pop up as being wanted by Spanish police, you can be extradited back there. Germany has now openly started has indicated they're going to cease extraditing people to Britain at Britain's request because of the state of British jails, which is quite amazing. So yeah, there are some encouraging movements on that front. There was a French publisher who was stopped under much the same police powers as I was when he entered the London from Paris. There was a judicial review launched of the police's response because he got arrested because he refused to hand over his passcodes to his electronic devices. There's been a British judicial review which concluded that what happened to him was very wrong. So we shall see.
Well, fingers crossed for you, my friend. Best of luck, Godspeed, keep doing what you're doing. Although I kind of want to tell you to stop in some ways because I'm worried about you. But I mean, the work, as I've said, I just think the work that you're doing is the best journalism in the world right now. And I think it's absolutely essential. If there's any chance for world peace, we have to have the kind of work that you're doing. So keep going, stay safe, and best of luck, and thank you.
God bless you. Cheers, dude. Thanks so much for having me on.
Totally. This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the Unreported News Analysis Show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.